Amathonenen, amathonechai, ahanostonen, Willis.
Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to episode 33 of By-The-Bywater. Glad to have you back with us. This is actually episode 33 version 2.0 as goblins from the North Pole came down and decided to celebrate the holiday by escaping Father Christmas and Carhu and came down and ate one of the audio files from our original recording. We are sad. There have been various technical gremlins and other things since then, and we're now finally here. We are now going to do a re-record, so we may not sound as suddenly surprised on certain points as we bring them up, but we had to bring them up anyway once more because, again, otherwise we would have no episode for you, and that would be sad. So Anyway, we didn't plan to record in December, but here we are. How's the month been going for you guys?
Busy.
Yeah.
Pretty busy.
Yeah. It really kind of feels like that. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's a little much. Oh, geez. But somehow we'll muddle our way through. We do have a big episode to talk about. We promised it, and we're actually a little sad we're not going to review the original version of it, which is truly rollicking. This one may be a little more focused, but maybe that'll be better for all of us.
Maybe that's better for the listeners. Yeah.
We were going on. We were doing things like this. They'll do that. However, let's just take care of what news there is right now. So, Jared, please, as always, do take it away.
There is next to no news to report this time around. Amazon has put all its promotional muscle behind the recent release of their Robert Jordan adaptation, The Wheel of Time, and per, earlier spy reports and guesses, we won't see any more official word from the Tolkien production until sometime next year. In a recent interview, there was a brief mention of the production by Will Poulter, who had to leave before filming started, but he just mentioned the problems with scheduling that can happen for actors, so nothing new there either. The only other thing to note is that details of Christopher Tolkien's will have come to light, indicating that his shares in the Tolkien Estate Limited have all gone to his widow Bailey, but that they will then be split among his three children after her passing. And as always, that's about all the news we'll ever get from the estate about anything specific.
The eternal mystery we will not know. We wouldn't mind the money, but you can't have everything. So
I love those guys, those secretive guys.
Personally, all I want is the rights to the Silmarillion. That's all I need, baby.
So if we can retrospectively amend that will, that'll be great.
Yeah, I found a new copy.
Bailey Tolkien, get at us.
Yeah, we're right
Bailey,
here.
holla at
it's not
you,
covered
girl.
in the deal. We'll just sell. We'll buy it for you extra $1. You don't need any more money. You got that $250 million. You're fine.
Yeah,
You're
I have
fine.
a vision.
Oh God, wow, yeah.
It was that much. So of course, given inflation now, it's what, $2? No, anyway. So it all worked as it did. And we will throw in a word that we weren't actually able to do as much on when we recorded the first episode, but now that it's been some episodes in, Wheel of Time is doing pretty well.
It's
I would
pretty
say,
good.
yeah. It's obviously a much different production team, etc., working on it than is working on the Tolkien one, even though it's all Amazon Studios. However, based on the 5 of the 8 episodes that appeared so far, it's a solid first season. It is doing a reasonable job of boiling down what is even a more almost insanely complicated narrative. So, a lot less longeurs, let's say, than that book series had, and by which I mean about 3 or 4 books right in the middle. But we'll see how they eventually adapt that. It's obviously a different narrative, different approach, etc. as well. So we can't quite do a 1-to-1. But it seems potentially promising that with the right money and the right people, we might get something good out of it. We'll see.
You can feel the marks of The Lord of the Rings, and in particular the movie, which ties in nicely to our topic. But you can feel the fingerprints of the Peter Jackson films all over The Wheel of Time, even as it is very much its own entity. But, when you start with an ethereal female voiceover telling you the story of the world, you can't help but maybe see it as an homage.
Yeah, a few direct comparisons to be made there, I'm sure. I still haven't watched it, so I have no idea.
It's pretty solid. I'm feeling it.
Yeah, we won't keep you away from crazy details there, but yes, it is a case where you've got it's. I think that I read something and pointed out that essentially, we're so used to, Game of Thrones being the model that what Wheel of Time is in some respects the sort of in between model where you have something that given when it was written too, that even though of course it was essentially concurrent for a while as Martin was developing his story, but it's still got the big epic fantasy white dark overlay, but there is a lot more complexity in politicking and things going on, so it's sort of an almost retrospective way to look back at it. That would be a lot more information to bring into if we were doing a whole study of things, but we're not. We're talking about a movie instead this time out, and that's what we'll go ahead and do for us once again, but for you, you're hearing it for the first time. And so Jared, do please lead us into discussion of what we're doing this time around.
Yeah, so, I mean, normally, we write fairly detailed introductions because sometimes we're talking about things that are more obscure or maybe need more of a broad knowledge base. But, it's the movies. Everybody's seen the movies. So what I really want to talk about first is, what was both of your experience leading up to the movie, seeing the movie? What was your first introduction, I guess, to Fellowship of the Ring, directed by Peter Jackson? What was your life then? What was happening?
Yes, came out 20 years ago this month.
20 years ago? I'm crumbling into dust right now.
Crypt Keeper vibes.
Yep.
Oh, God.
2 decades. So, well, Oriana, you want to kick this one off?
Sure. This was really interesting to think about because I didn't fully realize, because the Fellowship of the Ring in particular amongst these films has occupied a very special place in my heart and in my life for a long time now. But looking back, I only have vague memories. I know my dad took me to see it in the theater and I loved it. But the run up, both of you guys had much more. Well, you'll talk about this in a moment about your experiences in the run up to the movie. Whereas I was why don't I remember myself being on the onering.net or really experiencing this in a very intense way? And I realized that it was because the Harry Potter movie, the first Harry Potter movie, came out the same year. And Harry Potter was huge at my school and was the sort of dominant cultural language that we were all speaking when I was in 9th grade. Yes. The books were still being written, still coming out, and Harry Potter just dominated the conversation. Casting news was huge, directing news, all sorts of information like that. It was all centered around the Harry Potter series. And I feel like that kind of overwhelmed the lead up for me personally of The Lord of the Rings, which is kind of a bummer. It's weird to think about given how special it was to me.
And Jared, for you?
I remember the first time hearing about it was when they released that, wasn't a trailer, what was it called? I had time to look this up before recording this.
Is it a
Like a little special web preview or something.
That 2-minute, not quite a trailer, but they had the VFX and here's how we're doing the orcs and whatever. And seeing that and going, what? They're making a movie out of it? And this was 1999 or something when that came out.
Oh my God.
Early 2000?
Maybe 2000?
Yeah. I think it was about halfway through filming.
I don't know. I was very young.
Yeah.
I remember feeling visceral rage at it, first of all.
Yeah.
Because if you watch it, and we could probably link to it in the show notes, it's on YouTube. You can look at it. It's really cool. I can say that now. But at the time, I had no idea what this kind of thing was, what this little featurette sort of thing. So they had shots of armies of orcs allegedly fighting the Battle of the Last Alliance in Mordor, but they're running across a green plain in front of an obviously fake volcano covered with snow. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, they're ruining it. They're ruining it. I can't believe they're doing that. And I was not one to talk there because I learned the wrong pronunciations of everything from my mother. So, like, I was getting it wrong too. I just have to get that in there.
Truth comes out at long last.
Because her family pronounced Gandalf, like half, but that's how she read the book to us, and that's how I thought it was pronounced. And that was my first experience of being corrected by Tolkien fandom, was saying Gandalf around my best friend at the time, and he was like, it's Gandalf. And I was like,
oh my God.
Anyway, so.
Oh, what a devastating moment.
I know. Oh God. I was, as somebody who always wants to get words right, it was like, oh, I can't. Anyway. But then, you know, then they had that site, lordoftherings.net. I still hear, like, Orlando Bloom or Viggo Mortensen or whoever, they would have that voice.
Christopher Lee, that was the best one.
Well,
yeah,
sure.
You would go to you go to the site, and there'd be that flash animation, and you'd hear, this is Christopher Lee, and welcome to lordofthering.net, and you'd see, oh, is there news? What production stuff have they released? Is there concept art? What's happening? And checking that every single day leading up to the release, and even after, because I wasn't able to see it in theaters, I'm still mad about that.
Oh.
So that was the first movie I was really excited for, even given the initial, like, they're doing it wrong. Reaction. Yeah, it was kind of a formative experience for me. That's like, the first thing coming out that I remember being really into, and I treasure that memory.
Despite all that you had to go through to actually see it.
Oh God. Yeah, like we couldn't see it in theaters, so we had to wait until it came out on HBO or something and record it on a VHS.
Hell yeah.
So that we could watch it. And I remember, like, commandeering the VHS so I could handwrite the label on it.
Oh,
like a
precious.
With that. Like one of those fine tip Sharpies writing Lord of the Rings, like the movie logo with the little drawing of a ring, and I was like, this is this is all I have to offer.
Precious boy. Precious.
Yeah, and ended up watching it probably mid 2002, whenever it would have found a cable.
Yeah.
I didn't look this up, I should have. But, like, had to watch it in my parents' bedroom because the other kids were too little to see it. And I was sitting there huddled up on the bed, like, oh my God, like hearing Galadriel's voice and going, like screaming into a towel kind of thing. Oh, yeah. Man, now I'm all nostalgic for that crappy videotape. Cropped to fit your TV screen and all that.
Very special.
Yeah.
Very special.
Yeah, it's a time and place thing. Trust me, I have my own equivalent stories with various other things. Well, with me, the big difference was that, compared to you guys, I was a fully functioning adult. And I could go see it whenever I darn well wanted to, and I did.
Oh my God.
So, but sort of to put the run up in perspective. So for Oriana mentioned Harry Potter, of course, as being the other big thing that had come out just the month beforehand, and of course even more intense in some corners, certainly than Tolkien's was still a bit of a mystery, even though people knew who he was. J.K. Rowling's work was just that much more immediate.
Yeah.
In the moment.
Yeah.
But to take it back a bit, the 3 years essentially before Lord of the Rings came out was sort of a new crest of heavy geekdom on a variety of fronts, you could say. In terms of the 99 to end of 2001 period, you've got, and admittedly this is casting a very broad net, but that's kind of the point. We are in the era of Ain't It Cool News.
Oh no.
we are in the era of spy sites like theonering.net, which of course was the other site that we were all checking obsessively. And this was also, if you think about what happened over those years, you've got Star Wars prequels start. You've got The Matrix. You've got the true modern wave of superhero movies kicks in. Blade arguably before that, but more appropriately, X-Men.
Yeah.
So you've got all this sort of in a jail. That's sort of the idea is like these kind of spectacles can exist. Now, to pull it back a bit, the thing I always remember when I first heard the word that Jackson was doing this in 97, my first reaction was, what in the... Because even though I knew about Jackson from a variety of things, and he had achieved some initial small amount of fame with Heavenly Creatures, which of course was the breakout for Kate Winslet, and deserves attention, it's a really remarkable film still, is that he was of course more well known for these kind of blood and guts gross out, alien horror comedies and things like that. But then I remember thinking a few seconds later, practically, going like, wait a minute. He knows how to make self-contained universes. That's what his films do. His films always do that. There's no join. There's no something that you can watch it, and everything makes internal sense on the screen. It's sort of like, oh, okay. And I thought this may be what makes it work. And bizarrely enough, the film of his that at the time I drew the most sort of potential, if he can do it like this, he'll be fine, is Meet the Feebles, which is an incredibly over the top, ridiculous, X-rated version of the Muppets. Essentially, is what it is. Marvelous film, I should note, but oh my goodness, but it is insane, and yet at the same time, it self-consistently works as a vision of what if Muppets were in Wellington, New Zealand, putting on a show and were completely ripped on sex and drugs and more things besides, and it works on that level. It actually is staged and pulled off very, very, very well with Jackson's collaborators. So I thought, if he can do something like that for this, he'll be fine. I'm still worried until I see it, though, and that was the thing. But like Jared was saying, I wasn't going into a bedsheet or anything like that because when I first saw it, it was opening night. It was what's called the Big Newport Theater, which is one of the biggest screens in the entire country. Where a bunch of us are all in about third of the way back from the screen. The place, it's all packed and sold out. And everything descends, everything sort of kicks in, and then it's just, you hear that little soft little tones, and then all of a sudden, Cate Blanchett's voice amped up and just sort of filling the entire thing. The world's changed. You're just like,
Dude.
And it's just, it is a marvelous moment of introduction. And the other thing that's also marvelous about that as well is how to compare it to the experience of my youth that really blew my mind movie going, and that is 6 years old, 1977. I see Star Wars. What do you get? You get your little crawl. Long time ago, Galaxy Far, Far Away. Boom!
Yeah.
You get the logo on the screen. You get the orchestral stab. You're in. You're off. You're like, whoa! And then you get this, huge. You get the ship going overhead, and then you're off. You're sold pretty much for the most part. This is a very interesting epic because it's an antithesis of that. It really is. You do get a spoken word opening rather than anything written, and then against total blackness, you're just sort of like, okay, what's here? And then instead of a logo just slamming into place and a huge thing, it emerges almost out of shadow, almost like it's like torchlight or a sunrise or something passing there. And it was the Lord of the Rings. And it's this quiet, soft little theme, incredibly counterintuitive for a big epic movie and incredibly well done. It just sort of like it's mastery of the form, and we'll talk more about how the Fellowship of the Ring just is the film that above all the films, above all six Jackson films, is the one that nails it, is the one that absolutely hits it from stem to stern. But I'll stop there if we want to go further.
I mean, it is a miracle that this movie works at all. It is still I know that we had X-Men and Star Wars had been a thing for a long time, but the fact that we got people on a mass scale to buy in to like an 8-ish minute prologue detailing like very dense history, it's pretty efficient, honestly. Like, you don't need to know that much. It's just the right amount of broad strokes. But then for people to buy into that immediately is still astonishing to me. And I think that what helps that, honestly, is, and this is where I think the theatrical version is head and shoulders above the extended cut, which 10 years ago I wouldn't have said that. This is an insane thing to say. But that cut from the end of the prologue to Frodo in the shot, Frodo sitting reading a book, I think is just masterful.
Yeah, it's so elegant.
Exactly. It's just, it is a miracle that this worked at all. I still am in awe.
Yeah, I mean, talk about why it works. Like, how does Fellowship of the Ring manage to pull off everything that it does? I mean, it helps that the prologue is there. I mean, it's like the first bit of Up, where it's like there's this self-contained almost short film.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it just moves so fast and also is able to stop and breathe, like those shots of rippling water and everything. And then it's off to other things. And it's just, you're there.
Like, this whole series of movies was not cheap. Don't get me wrong.
No.
The prologue if you like actually were to look at the, the dailies or whatever, it's kind of cheap.
Yeah. What is it? It's like a one black screen for or black wall for the elves, and then another black wall for the humans, and then like a rock room
doing
for the
kind
dwarves.
of hokey, doing kind of hokey things, and that's just the magic of cinema, baby. You feel like such a cliche.
Yeah.
Cinema and good editing. And I think the thing too about the prologue, we don't want to stick too much into this because there's so much more to talk about. It sets up the sort of uniformity of the experience over those first few minutes. You get a sense of what the color of the films will be like, how it looks, how it plays out on the screen, what the shading is. The film, of course, was famously digitally graded very carefully to establish color tones throughout on a very consistent level. You have a demonstration of special effects chops. It's like, hey, look, see what we can do here, and now we'll cut away from that. We're going to
massive
big
CGI
like that.
armies that nobody had ever done before.
Yeah, with their own little minds of their own.
Yeah.
Wow. And being able to do that, and then basically not returning to that for the entirety of the film, but sort of like, oh, here's your quick, huge money shot. Bye. And then we don't get things like that until later on in the series. We get the music as mentioned. We get a sense of what these characters look like, style, design, etc. like that. And even in something as simple as introducing Gollum, carefully, not showing him, just a silhouette in the distance, and then giving a sense of what hobbits are like. And Ian Holm just even going, oh, what's this? It's sort of like, oh, okay. This nice little fussy guy who's been startled and is out here and is dressed in his waistcoat and all that. It's marvelously efficient indeed. And then we're off. Well, I'll loop back to something else that was important too of the time of the film came out a little later when we're talking about theme, but something that we didn't really talk about as much when we did our first version of this episode, that we might want to give a little more shine to, and that is the fact that the film is not fully carried on, but ultimately depends on the actions of a already experienced 19-year-old actor who, by his own admission, had not read the book at the time. Let's talk about Elijah Wood as Frodo. Let's talk about, because Frodo is so often in talking about the book and in the movies, he's sort of like, even though he's theoretically the central character, he's almost sort of like everything seems to swirl around him, but you've got to sell that, and to be able to do a visual interpretation of that and an acting interpretation of that is kind of hard. I think he does it very well. I think it's a really inspired performance.
He just gives such good face.
Those big liquid blue eyes that are always about to brim with tears.
Yeah. It's fascinating because at first I was mad because Frodo is supposed to be in his 50s,
True. Yeah.
That's true.
He's supposed to be this much more mature sort of gentle hobbit. And I was like, this is a child playing him. What's that about? And, I immediately was like, oh, dude, this is great. He is totally nailing the increasing control that the ring has over, or hold that the ring has over him.
As he sort of becomes more and more ethereal as the movies, in the first scene, even he's running around, he's leaping into Gandalf's arms to give him a hug. He's very much a child. And then by the end of Fellowship of the Ring, but especially the end of the whole movie trilogy, he's he is worn out, and he nails that without being too without overselling it.
Yeah.
I think there's something to the fact that this is also the question of adaptation. Interestingly, we have a sort of almost parallel experience with what happened with the recent Dune adaptation, which I think we all rather liked. But we have it here as well in that is that we don't have Frank Herbert style internal monologues or anything like that in Tolkien necessarily, but we do get a lot of stuff that's very much from within a character as is written out by the narrator or thinking about things. Frodo, for instance, famously, his dreams are very vividly detailed. We don't really get that here. We don't really get that sense of his own sort of taking stock of himself. It does have to be essentially external and what we see of it in terms of action. But I do agree that I think that he takes direction well, from what I can tell, and is able to really concentrate down the sense of how to look at the right time. Of course, a director asks for multiple takes, they work out the character, etc. So it's also the matter of choices as it comes across. But you really do get a sense pretty quickly that he's going through a lot of stuff, and that part of him is starting to really sort of like by the end of Fellowship, he's feeling very unmoored. He's just sort of like, who can I trust? What can be trusted, and all that. So which of course makes the scene with Sam all the more important. Now, we did talk about Sam, of course, quite a bit in the previous episode and Sean Astin's interpretation of it, but that dynamic is so much more. I don't want to say so much more interesting, but it's a different kind of dynamic in the film that is distinct from the book, which I think is to its credit. It's something that Jackson was very conscious about, and the screenwriting team, that they wanted to be something that they weren't not quite equals, but on much more equal footing, as opposed to a master and servant relationship. And I think that's to the good.
Much more friends. Yeah.
Well, it helps. I mean, the switch in ages definitely mitigates that.
True.
In the book, I forget what the age gap is, but Frodo is significantly older than Sam.
Yeah, at least 15 years or so.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also super bothered at first by Frodo being, a teenager or whatever.
Right.
The baby. But like, there's a lot of things that's doing. One of them is changing the relationship with Sam to be more equal, but also without the hobbits being as young as they are on screen, I think it would be hard to sell, in some ways, the idea of hobbits as an innocent and kind of childlike people.
Yeah.
Because if Frodo's going around and he's Ian Holmes' age or whatever,
right,
it's a little it works on the page because you're getting his thoughts. But if you're just seeing this little old man wandering around, it's a very different experience.
It is. It would be very easy for that to kind of fall into like old fool kind of territory, I think.
Yeah.
And no one wants that.
No.
So here's something to maybe bring up as we talk about them, and of course also Dominic Monaghan and Billy Boyd as Merry and Pippin as well. The decision, of course, made to cast actors who happen to be just, actors of, dare I say, quote unquote, average size, let's say, average height, more accurately, instead of doing what was famously done in Willow is a good example, just casting actors who were of that height. And this was something that was a big topic of discussion at the time, and I think rightly. And I think it's one of those things that you look at it now, it's sort of like, could this have been done differently? Should it have been done differently? And I think there's certainly a case for that. Yeah.
I think you're right. Probably. Yeah. I'm not gonna. It's one of those things where I can love the thing as it is and also be like, maybe you guys should have done. There's plenty of very talented actors who are of the proper size.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Post Peter Dinklage, pretty much there's no excuse at this point. Yeah. So it's sort of like, there you go. So
yeah. I mean, there are a ton of issues overall, I think, with the casting just in terms of diversity. And
Yep.
Like that's a whole thing. I mean, people are complaining even now about actors of color being included in the Amazon series, so you can see why maybe in 1999 they weren't thinking about it at all.
I certainly wasn't, which is really funny. Like,
yeah. But like the casting as given, I mean, that we're given is over for the most part. I mean, I have one exception that I hate, but everybody else, like Ian McKellen,
dude,
they're all great. Let's sing some praises.
Can we talk about Ian McKellen?
Yes,
and his domination of.
Oh God, the only person to be nominated for an Oscar for these movies. I mean, acting Oscar for these movies.
That's correct.
Well deserved.
Yeah.
He's so good.
Because again, if you don't he's actually kind of the linchpin, I feel. More so than the hobbits, more so than anyone else. If you think Gandalf is silly, if any element of this performance is off, it doesn't work. The movies don't work. You don't buy in. You are like, this is just a silly little fairy tale. But because McKellen brings the most gravitas outside of Christopher Lee that I've ever seen in an actor.
Yeah.
And because he marries that gravitas with this incredible warmth.
Yeah.
And, sometimes Gandalf's inherent bitchiness comes out as well, which is fun.
Yes. this bold queen kind of thing that Ian McKellen sometimes has. It's
Which
there
is
and it's amazing.
for
Yes,
for
it is.
Gandalf, because we've talked about what a little bitch Gandalf is sometimes.
We heard it
Yeah,
here.
he-
He would
he
probably
really-
not disagree. So
No.
the fact that it was raised the other day online on Twitter or something like that, Viggo Mortensen is now older than Ian McKellen was when Lord of the Rings was
I
filmed.
can't.
I refuse to
I
accept this.
can't
There's no way
believe
that's
that.
true.
No.
It's true. I'm
I
sorry
know
to say
it's
it's
true, but it's a lie. It's true,
It's
but
a
it
true
feels like
and
a
yet a lie
lie
at the same time. So the thing about you're right about again, I think the fact that we start the movie proper with Frodo and Gandalf, and that, as you mentioned, Gandalf is the linchpin.
That's so
is
important.
Very, very good. The extended version, of course, has Ian Holmes' wonderful thing that matches the introduction of the book, and it's a lovely sequence. But yeah, one of the things I did when rewatching this recently was to rewatch the theatrical version, which I hadn't seen for the first time in forever. And yeah, that immediacy was sort of like, okay, yeah, you got it sort of established. That opening scene, again, it's an opening scene that sells a lot of stuff. It sells the height difference. Boom. You're sort of like, okay, the filmmakers worked that out.
Yeah.
Great. It technically looks lovely. You've got a chance for Gandalf to show his warmth, his waspishness, his sense of sort of like that he's able to be, playful and considerate, if you will, with Frodo, and able to be just a hint of serious enough when he reaches Bilbo, and you've got him and Ian Holm interacting and all that. It's just one of those things that you do get a gentle range of a character, and you don't need an explanation. You don't need the explanation that comes from being steeped in the lore. I mean, we've had our episodes on the wizards and things like that, but this is much more like, when you first say read The Hobbit, you're just walking along and then sort of Gandalf appears, just like that, and he's the wizard, and you're like, you're good, you're solid.
He's just the wizard.
And the film treats that. That's really handy. That's really lovely how it does that. The other thing, having mentioned him, is, of course, the casting that shouldn't have happened, except for, thankfully, his kid being all judged for it, and that's Viggo Mortensen as the fluke casting of God as Aragorn. How lucky were we? How amazingly lucky.
This is, I said there was one thing that I hated. I am less wild about Viggo Mortensen than I think a lot of people are.
Really?
He does a good job, but his Aragorn is not my Aragorn in a weird kind of way.
Hashtag not my Aragorn.
Yeah, not my Aragorn. It's nothing to do with the performance or anything exactly. It's more that maybe Jackson's Aragorn isn't my Aragorn.
That makes sense.
He's I know he's a ranger. I know he's running around in the wild all day, but this Aragorn is super grungy and disgusting, which is fine.
It doesn't sound like it's fine.
It's like, I don't know, but it doesn't. It's not as fine as I would like it to be. And this, I think this movie, which on its own is flawless and amazing and beautiful, we love it, sets up what I think is one of the biggest problems of the trilogy, which is that Aragorn becomes the main character.
Yes.
And takes over the narrative and ends up being way more war focused and kingship focused. And the books are like, yeah, the last one's called The Return of the King, but that's almost minor given everything else that's going on.
It's a subtitle, really.
Yeah, but Jackson's vision of Aragorn is protagonist, and Frodo is deuteragonist.
I do wonder how much of that was. I'm not gonna say Peter Jackson had nothing to do with that huge adaptational change in focus, but that does feel very studio note to me. That does feel very well, who's gonna be on the poster? We can't put the child with the very large eyes on everything. We need he's the king. He's got to be special. He's got to be the special. And
he's the special boy.
You can tell these people till you're blue in the face that that's not the point of this whole story. Very pointedly, not the point of the story. And they'll go, but people like kings, and I guess they're not wrong. But I think you're right. I think you're right.
If you look at the development of these movies, it's a miracle we got the movies we got.
Yeah.
Yes, because the original versions, when they, I think it was whatever the first studio was, wanted them to make one movie, and Jackson was like, no, two, it has to be at least two. And then, Harvey Weinstein got involved at some point and made a good, one of the few good decisions of his life.
Unfortunately.
Not speaking up for him, I'm just saying this decision for Lord of the Rings was good. I forget what it was, but it was no, we gotta make it closer to Tolkien in some ways. And
Yeah.
It is. We can say this much about the otherwise horrid Weinsteins, is that pretty much they gave Jackson the opportunity to find somebody to actually sort of take it over from them, and then develop that from there. And then that led to the meeting with New Line, and the head of New Line, what was his name, Bob Shea, I think, famously saying, "You pitched this as 2 movies, aren't there 3 books?"
Mm-hmm.
And that fluke decision that turned out to be exactly what was
Hell
needed. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you, sir.
As a little aside, I go to the Warner Brothers lot once a week these days because I'm in the Raiders workshop, and the first time I drove onto the lot, I got horribly lost and ended up at the New Line office. I just sat for a minute, even though I was horribly worried about being late, and just was like, oh, they gave me so much, So thanks, New Line.
Place of pilgrimage, yeah.
It's such a beauty mark of the time, if you will, that if you watch the original, as I still have the original theatrical DVD of it, and it comes up with the logo, it says New Line, all that, and then it says an AOL Time Warner company.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's 2001 for you. That's 2001. Stepping back, actually, to talk a little more about wider context and things like that. Here was sort of my experience in the 3 months or so going into it, because of course the unplanned factor, glib to say it that way, but it's true, was that when the films were being prepped up and made and all the rest of it, nobody knew that 3 months before the first one was going to be released, 9/11 was going to occur. And there are interesting shadows and weird accidents of history that resulted from from this combination of things that we can talk more about, really more in the later films. But in some respects, what happened and the political unease, to put it very mildly, of that time fed into my reactions going into with the film gearing up, because I was very much sort of like, okay, the film's coming, and then I was thinking about this, and then there were other things going on in my life. There's a lot going on. I'm not going to unpack it all here, but one thing I really wanted to do was take some time and do a last reread of the book before I figured the movie would drive it out of my head for a while, at least. I've since been able to, separate them all out again. But I knew it was one of those things like, okay, the movie's going to eat my brain for a while. let me ditch the book. And so something that was vitally important to me when I reread it was the exchange in the second chapter, Shadow of the Past, where Frodo and Gandalf are talking, and Frodo says, "What a pity Bilbo didn't kill Gollum," and Gandalf says, "Pity was pity and mercy." And that whole exchange about something that, in a time when vengeance was being talked about a little too much in the context of the wide world, and in a very, very haphazard fashion, for lack of a better term. So I was sort of like, oh, please make sure this is in the movie. It was. And I still think that, to my mind, that is not the most important thing that made it from the books into the movies.
It's up there.
Yeah.
It's crucially done, and to have it be another, to be like the book, where it's a small, quiet scene in a much different part of the story, but it's still a small, quiet scene between Frodo and Gandalf, between Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen, and they make it work. Mm-hmm. And it's filmed and just done so well, and Howard Shore's music, everything is one of those things like,
yeah,
it's so good that it was there.
Yeah.
I think that moving that moment to where it is in the movie is better, actually.
That's absolutely the correct choice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's because there's so much stuff in that Shadow of the Past chapter that
you couldn't possibly put that whole thing on screen as written.
Nope. You couldn't put it in there as written, and so many of those moments, while they don't feel out of place in the book, you kind of want them to be a little more earned, let's say. Like some of these little bon mots from Gandalf, you kind of want there to have been a little more history between some of the characters. And I in the middle of Moria is a pretty good choice for that moment.
Especially in the book, when that conversation happens, Frodo hasn't seen Gollum. He just knows
no
of
idea,
Gollum as Gollum is a storybook character almost to him. Like he's read Bilbo's book and that's all he knows. But having it in Moria with Gollum literally there and Gandalf going, no, yeah, this hideous creeping thing is dangerous, but it's actually good that he wasn't murdered. It's such an interesting place to put it, and it adds so much emotional texture to that conversation that isn't present in the original book.
Right, right. The sort of scenes I think that are kind of the key ones, you could say, that they hit these beats, and either they're this reductions for the screen or the fact they were included would probably be we talked about the prologue. There's the Council of Elrond. We can circle back on that because that's where you have to have the big exposition dump, and how do you handle that?
Yeah.
Then you have this
if you're the
scene.
theatrical edition, you don't handle it.
You just don't.
That's its own thing. And then you've got then we'll get back to the Mirror of Galadriel scene, and then of course the ending. It's sort of like, it's not that these are the only scenes that they were needed, but they seem to be the ones that are sort of key, and to one extent or another they were at least addressed, even though not necessarily totally successfully, although the extended version certainly helps with that. But I think what the thing that stands out for me is that a wider Jackson decision, and we keep saying Jackson, really we should say it's Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens. They are the trio of writers who are shaping it all. So let's give them credit. They're very much involved the whole way. Of course, Fran Walsh has been working with him on all his films pretty much almost from the get-go. So let's keep that in mind. Is that they made the decision to make the film version of Lord of the Rings, the film version of Middle-earth, a lot more desperate, on the edge, and rushed. And I think this is good for a movie.
Yeah.
And to give you sort of the comparison point is that in the book, you can have the gap between the party and Frodo needing to leave the Shire be 17 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Gandalf can go off and go like, I'll just check out some things and do some things for a while.
For over a decade, it'll be fine.
Yeah. Here, of course, it's basically sort of like he sort of realizes that, okay, things are not looking so good when the wonderful sequences, when, you know, Bilbo does give up the ring and what it all means and all the rest of it. And Gandalf's like, okay, I'm out. You know, I need to go figure this out and then come back as soon as possible and try and get this worked out. And then everything is like, you know, everything feels a little more unsafe, I guess is the best way to put it. And another good example and another great sequence is Bree and the Prancing Pony, where we do get to meet Aragorn for the first time. Is that this is kind of speaks to Jared's point. The Prancing Pony in Bree is not my Prancing Pony in my head.
Right.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, it's much less, you know, uneasy. There's, you know, the Butterbur who we see briefly is a nice, friendly enough guy, but we don't get the Lord of the Rings Butterbur, and he's very much missed. Yeah, but again, in terms of keeping the story going, I understand why. But I remember there was a description, I think it's in the commentaries or it's somewhere else, talking about how they wanted to make the Prancing Pony feel like a little more grungy, divey, and the color grading is almost like urine stained, which is on the one hand gross, but on the other hand, and that feeling of it. And, you know, and again, it's not the book, but it suits the milieu of the movies as they're set up. That's what I would argue.
They're creating a vibe and a tone. And is this a good place to talk about the color grade? Should we do that real quick?
Sure. Please
because, oh no, they ruined it.
Bad.
Like, not the original is
the original's great.
It's great. And I do believe that the theatrical version on HBO Max currently is the regular one, and it's the extended version that is the remastered 4K 8 million pixel whatever
technobabble,
and it's awful. It's awful.
It's so bad. It's so bad. And it's not even it's not the colors of my childhood.
No.
It's
incorrect.
It's incorrect. Wow, I'm just staring over everything right now.
Furious.
I'm so mad. The stated reason is to bring the make it more visually coherent, the whole trilogy together, which is bananas because there's a reason the Shire is this shade of green in the Fellowship of the Ring. But in the remaster, it's a little more yellow. It's kind of bad. And there's all this completely senseless vignetting that is distracting and vanishes between shots, so there's not even any consistency to it. It's a nightmare. It's bad. Nobody should pay for this.
Jared, for our listeners who may not be aware, what is vignetting?
Vignetting is, think of like a lot of Instagram filters that have kind of shadows on the edge of the frame or in the corner.
Yeah!
And sometimes it's very useful because it can emphasize whatever your intended focal point is.
Sure.
But in the case of the Fellowship of the Ring, which was not built with vignetting in mind.
Mm-mm.
It's just distracting and unnecessary.
Yeah, I feel like it does a huge, like this grade, and I know that it was Jackson et al. Who did this remaster, and I feel bad, but it does this remaster does a huge disservice to all the craftspeople who worked on the costumes and the sets and everything, because I swear to God, they just turned the contrast knob up to
basically
all the way.
Yeah.
And you're missing so many incredible details in the costuming and the sets. Like, they just vanish into the shadows, and it sucks deeply.
Yeah. And the original cinematography by Andrew Lesnie, R.I.P., is, especially in Fellowship of the Ring, is so lush and rich and kind of velvety. And then by turning the contrast up, you're ruining this work of art.
Yeah.
And it also, I mean, aside from that, even if it wasn't ruining this beautiful cinematography, some of the details that now become apparent are like special effects.
Yes.
You can see the seams now way more than you could before. Like in the scene, it's so bad, in the scene where Gandalf and Bilbo are talking in Bag End about, Bilbo giving up the ring, and you've had long enough. In the theatrical edition and the original extended, you can kind of see the blue screen a little bit, but it's not super apparent.
Yeah.
You'd have to be looking for it to really see it. In the remaster, it is cardboard cutouts moving around each other, and it sucks.
It's
Hate it. Yeah.
It's really disappointing, and I hope I know they probably put a lot of work and money into doing that. I hope,
but they should.
Yeah. I hope it disappears.
And, given that everyone's been talking about Peter Jackson's like, oh, what a marvelous job he did on the Beatles film and Get Back and all that. It's like, think to yourself, what maybe did he change? But that's all I'll say. Makes you wonder. But yeah, no, Steve, if you have the Blu-ray editions from 10 years back, hold on to those. Which I sure am.
I had not the Blu-rays, just the regular DVDs, the extended versions, from Christmases in childhood or high school, and I don't know where they went, and it's such a bummer. I guess moving 50 different times in the intervening 20 years kind of
that'll do it.
Yeah.
you gotta be careful sometimes. They run away with you. So let's see. So thinking about then some other points of characterization, let's talk about how Sauron essentially is this wonderfully, distant figure that only emerges in fits and starts. We have the flash of the eye when Gandalf reaches for the ring that one time, which I think is incredibly well done. And then of course you have the just the I see you moment when Frodo has the ring on in the prancing pony, and you're just sort of like, what's going on there. But of course, what we have in terms of evil being represented fully or sort of with two main areas, and the first is of course the Black Riders, who are terrifying. This is easily one of the best elements of the film. The Nazgul are truly just like
even knowing how those sequences in the Shire are going to go, you're sitting there watching it and going, oh my god, they're so the screaming, it's so many good choices.
and I think we can give a good crediting for editing. I think that one of the more striking bits is when the four hobbits are hiding away and the Black Rider looms up on the bank above them, and we get all these quick close shots of just it can be the hooves with the nails driven through the hooves, which is really really vicious looking. Obviously not really they did to the horses, but got a sense of this excessive cruelty, this binding that they do the animals, the way that sort of these hints and flashes and bits, and just the quick movement too of the rider from the horse down to the ground when you start moving that. We don't. That's just a little intensity ramp up from the books where it's more sort of crawling, mysterious. This is more like that, and this sense of swiftness, the sense that the Black Riders are not messing around, is also evident just a little bit of scene later when they're running to try and get to cross the Brandywine River, and then all of a sudden one Black Rider essentially almost erupts from behind a tree at full gallop, and that's a jump scare moment. It's truly, as was said in one of the essays in Polygon's excellent year-long series about the Fellowship of the Rings anniversary of the film, is it's a horror movie. It is a horror movie being played out at various points points, and it's really very effective at that. You've got your jump scares, you've got your threats of death, you've got doom, you've got these zombies from beyond the grave, and just, it all piles up.
It adds a much needed sense of momentum to I love the pace of the book as a book. But when we're doing a movie, we need a bit more sense of momentum, and they really, really provide that.
Talking about it as a horror movie is a really interesting way to look at it too, because it's pulling in so many different varieties of horror. There's the undead wraiths and all that, and there's the sort of body horror of the orcs and all that, and the suspense and all that. But there's also things like, it's almost the kind of sort of pulpy horror that Indiana Jones occasionally is, where you're wandering through the remains of an older world, and at any point the corpse of this world is going to kill you, like in Moria with the Balrog and all these. There's this sense that things are falling apart around them, and that's its own specific horror.
And then you have the psychological horror of the ring itself.
Yeah,
pulling
which doesn't,
you into its world.
Yeah, which isn't, I think, as big a part of the Fellowship as it is of the later books, but it is definitely there. This is another thing to talk about. The way the movie handles Boromir, which is way different from the book.
Yeah,
very.
Boromir gets a personality. Thank you, Sean Bean. Thank you.
And screenwriters. He gets to play around with the hobbits. That's the cutest stuff ever.
It's beautiful.
It is really nice. And just to talk about, sort of clarify this scene, it's the bit where we're assuming nearly everyone listening has seen the movie, even if you haven't read the book, is a scene where it's Boromir teaching Perry and Mippin essentially how to do a little bit of sword fight training, which is one of those, oh yeah, why wouldn't that have happened, moments. It's certainly not in the book, but it totally makes sense of, sure, why wouldn't it occur? And yeah, it's sort of like, Sean Bean being like, just sort of roughing, just a humble smiling character and all that. It's a relief, really, is what it is. It's an interesting counterbalance, because in some respects, both the book and the movie, I don't want to say have a problem with this, but it's pretty clearly hinted early on that Boromir is going to be the one who's going to go down the spiral. Yeah. Is what it is. But what's interesting is that you get more of a sense beforehand, and this is really signaled by that lovely moment in Lothlorien, where Boromir, where he sort of lets down his guard, where the proud guy at the Council of Elrond, who's basically talking about, like, all the valor of Gondor and all the rest of it. He just sort of freely admits that, his father's not in the best of places. Things are sort of like desperate. And yet there's so much beauty in things that he loves about the city and his people. And it's a very, very striking moment. The more so because Aragorn is not so much centered. He's sort of a quiet observer, and he's almost not too sure how best to react to what Boromir sees in him, which is an interesting twist. So
yeah, Aragorn's conflict over how to deal with Gondor itself is, it's what you were saying earlier. It's not the one of the book.
It's a problem.
I kind of, this is, maybe to contradict myself earlier, I do think that movie Aragorn is an interesting character in a different story. Where he is, the long lost heir and all that. But whereas in the book, he's like, yes, I'm the heir, but it's kind of subordinate to this quest. In the movie, Aragorn's like, I don't really want to do this. And when Boromir is really trying to, like, bond with him over their shared humanity and, like, being Gondorian and all that, Aragorn is kind of like, no, like, side hug, but that's it. Like, we're not.
Please don't tag me.
Yeah, I'm not gonna engage with you on this. I really like that separately from what's happening in the story. I don't.
And how do we feel about Arwen's change and what they've done with her?
I'm fine with it.
I have done so. Like, I hated it at first when I was a wee bear.
Yeah, same.
I hated it. I was like, where's Glorfindel? How could you change literally anything about this? What do you mean you don't want to introduce a new character that we'll never see again? What are you talking about? And then I was like, yeah, this rules. Like, warrior boss girl. And now I'm kind of stuck in between, where it does feel a little strange, given that she never does anything like this in the rest of the movies.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a whole. We can talk about that when we come to those, because I have thoughts.
Yeah, things kind of unravel regarding Arwen in the later movies. But yeah, so I like the scenes themselves. They look great. If you want him, come and claim him is indelible.
That rules.
Yeah.
Pretty great moment. Yeah.
I'm not made of stone.
Yeah. I also really like it that it gives her actual interaction with Aragorn, and this is where the book falls short. They kind of stand next to each other once, and that's it. Like,
right?
Whatever.
It's just like they're in love. I told you they're in love. Believe me.
Just check the appendices, and maybe you'll believe me. Yeah, but like. Yeah, in the actual narrative, they like stand together in the Hall of Fire, and that's it. And there's like Bilbo kind of teases him a little bit about the Lady Arwen was there. Why weren't you showing up and all that? But in the movie, there's like that scene where she puts a sword to his throat, and she's like clearly overjoyed that she managed to catch him off guard. And it's really cute.
It's fun. It's a great way to introduce the character. I just wish they had kind of followed through. I don't want them turning her into like. You know,
don't make her a Tauriel.
Yeah,
exactly,
it's that problem of like, no, like you can have strong women who are not shield maidens.
Who are not actual warriors. They can
have agency without being violent. You know, violence and agency are not equivalent, despite how many screenwriters seem to think that they are.
Yeah. I mean, we get. You know, we get Galadriel too in the same movie, and she's the total opposite, which is a good.
They nailed it with her.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it with the Hobbit movies, where Tauriel is like the only woman, and she's got this burden of being the strong female character, and she's doesn't totally work.
Yeah,
I'll say that. Here, at least, you have Arwen who gets to like wield the sword and like face down the ring race, and it's awesome. And then we have Galadriel as like another way of wielding power, and that's pretty great.
That's nice. I like seeing that.
Galadriel's so good in this too. Kate Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett.
I don't think we finished talking about casting. Kate Blanchett is like, who else could have done that?
It's pretty amazing.
Really remarkable. I mean, I like most of the rest of the world. I think it must have been Elizabeth where I first took notice of her, the first film, of course. And it's sort of like, what? Who's this? And by the time they got around to that, it's sort of like, what a good idea. And of course, when she's literally the voice of the film to start with, essentially the overall narrator, if there is one, in terms of her appearances. And one of the things I like about her, one of the things I like about Lorien is it's not quite Tolkien's Lorien. You're not going up rope ladders, you're going up this winding staircase around the tree.
It's gorgeous.
Still glorious, though.
Beautiful.
Yeah, still fantastic. Everything's a little more, it's sort of a different heightened ethereality than is necessarily in the book when it comes to Lothlorien, even though Lothlorien is what it is, of course, don't get me wrong. But I think by amping up this sense that the elves are really on another plane, or really on another level, really translates well to the world that Jackson set up with it. And even though, of course, we have Martin Sokas, great actor, I'm fine, but you were still playing the purse. You were still playing Celeborn.
They give him some lines as a treat.
They do give him some lines.
They give him some lines. But it's all down to Kate. And one of the more effective things, I think, in terms of translating something from the book that they don't spell out, because they don't have to, is the searching glance that she gives each of the fellowship when they're first there. Instead of like, they effectively do that as strictly visually, and I think they handle that pretty nicely in a shorthand way. And also, whenever I watch the film, I look for the smaller touches they introduce, such as the bit about how they created a lighting rig for Kate Blanchett just to cause the lights in the eyes to sparkle like there was something there, and have that be a practical effect. Brilliant job. Good job, guys. That's well done.
Most of the reason this movie looks as good as it does is because so much of it is practical.
That's so important.
It is so important. And all of the miniatures and the time and the sculpting and oh my god, and like shitty remaster aside, if you just watch the regular version, it still looks amazing. Most of these effects look amazing.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons, aside from actual matters of storytelling and acting and whatever, that one of the reasons that the movie works so well is that everybody involved loved what they were doing. They wanted to do
care.
Yeah, it wasn't even like being paid, so I'm going to do the best job I could. It's like, I love this, so I'm going to make real swords and authentic chainmail and whatever for people who are like 70 feet away from the camera,
right?
And you see him as a blurry figure,
yeah,
but they still have the same level of care as it's really astounding. And that's, I think, again, comparing and contrasting the Hobbits, which is totally unfair, but the Hobbit movies don't have that same kind of interest because everybody was so tired.
Yeah, like, it's just exhausting.
Yeah, but the other movies, and this one especially, I think, just work on the sheer power of love.
The power of love, and that's, if we can circle back to the 9/11 of it all. Jesus. What a sentence. Ned, that was a very salient point, because I think that there was a sense of like people being very open to big epic movies like this that are just completely sincere and have a very clear morality to them. In troubled times, I think that was very appealing, and we all kind of wanted that stability, and while feeling a little unmoored, perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things, again, applicability, not allegory, but the fact that we have a author who survived World War I, wrote a book during World War II, and now it's getting this major presentation at a time when a new kind of war is coming for a new century, is very... again, this is a very American-centric vision of it all,
Yes.
but given the fact that, other countries were involved, including the UK, in terms of what happened after that, there's there's certain wider applicability there as well. And what it makes the arguments, which again, it is one of those things that, Tolkien himself famously says that, he considered Lord of the Rings to be a Catholic book in many ways. So this meditation on, guilt in one's actions and things like that, and grace, and not to not embrace violence, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much going on there. How that translates into a more mainstream approach is interesting. And yet, as I noted with the comment about, like, essentially Gandalf saying, don't go out looking for blood, is how that theme resonates on a wider level, even if it's not necessarily, as intrinsic. And that makes something like the Mirror of Galadriel scene so vivid. Another one of the cases where everything suddenly really, really connects. You have, again, two actors who we've both separately praised, now in a one-on-one. Again, not like the book, but, if Sam had been there, would have been fine. But I think reducing it down to this sort of elemental, like, back and forth, where basically it's sort of like, where Frodo is sort of encountering something very mysterious, and Galadriel knows where she's coming from, and yet he is still able to surprise her, and that leads to the big moments there. But I think that's a really good case of how do you represent what, in some respects, in the book was almost unrepresentable. It's sort of like, how do you conceive of this? What's the best way to do this? And I thought they did a very good job in sort of making what the mirror work essentially visually, even though it's almost like a mysterious, visionary thing.
Yeah,
just a little pot of water. They managed to make it work, yeah. But how about that transformation scene, though, right after that, where she,
I
plays
love
the
it.
Dark Lord, you love a queen, and all that.
I will never not love that.
It is high camp.
It is it's high camp while using the exact words from the book. It's very unusual.
Yeah.
It's remarkable the way it manages to, and it is camp, but it's also really scary anyway.
Yeah.
It's I go back every time I watch it, I have a different reaction to it. The first time, when I was technically a teenager, but very little, I was scared out of my wits.
Yes, I was terrified. In the theater, it was so loud.
Yeah, and then like the next time I saw it, I was like, really, guys?
Ugh.
Really?
I mean,
I'm
so
too
over
cool
the
for
top.
This. And then every time after that, I was like, actually, maybe this is fine. And like, that has held true every time I've seen it ever since then. It's just I have a different reaction, and I don't know what that means, but
it depends on what you bring to it, what you're feeling that day.
Do I want a queen? Sure.
Yeah, well, hey, now you put it that way. It's interesting how it's able to pull off something that you almost don't think about until you think about it, which I'm doing right now, is like half the scene is essentially telepathy. And yet it
Yeah.
works. You don't really question it. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
sure, it's a mental connection. Sure, they're just thinking at each other. And unlike we mentioned Dune, unlike how these sort of was stumblingly happened in David Lynch's Dune, which Denis Villeneuve did not repeat for his new adaptation, this one, it's sort of like the intense looks and the voiceovers. It works. I think it might just simply be the relatively quick pace of the editing. It's not like, 1 minute of just simply someone staring at you and then words coming out. We should talk maybe a little more. We mentioned Andrew Leslie in cinematography earlier, just wonderful sweeping examples. We can talk a little bit more about the excellence of the editing, which was done by 3 different teams throughout the entire series. I forget the name of John something, who was the main editor on this one, along with Jackson himself, of course. Is for my money one of the best edits is in that scene where basically, it is sort of like, the eye is in the pool, is in the mirror, the ring is out there, just Frodo just sort of grabs the ring, jerks back, and then there's this little cut, and then you just see the mist rising above the thing, and everything's silent.
That's such a gorgeous moment.
Just sort of like, it's a lovely way to represent a moment of high, and you realize the tension's happening precisely because all of a sudden the sound cuts away. So again, credit to the sound designs. These are all examples where all the little decisions all tie together to create something truly, truly remarkable. A couple more casting things we talked about. We haven't really talked about Christopher Lee yet.
Oh,
what is there to say?
I mean, we didn't deserve it. Like,
we didn't.
He's just too
gift.
good. He's too good. It's sort of a piece with the Gandalf of it. Like, although I will say I do find the fight between them to be kind of silly.
Let's talk about the
and
fight.
not in a great way, not in a fun way. I don't love it.
No, it's so bad. I hate it.
I kind of like it.
Yeah.
I like it because it doesn't show them like casting bolts at each other.
Okay,
Oh,
yes.
that would have been even worse.
That is a fair point. That's a good point.
I just like the sense of elemental force. Of course, given what Star Wars was doing at the time with like people throwing each other around with force stuff, even without force bolts, it's sort of like, well, maybe there's after echoes there. But it has something. There was a good comparison I read at the time that was framing it in terms of not merely what we saw in 2 years prior in The Matrix, but also in terms of general, you could say, wuxia and kung fu movies and all that were sort of like, just, impossible, physically impossible moves. And this is kind of a representation of that, which I can buy. But it is something where it is distinctly different from the book, where you don't know. Yeah. And you brought this up earlier, Oriana. You don't know exactly how it is that, Gandalf was exactly overpowered. It just happens.
And I would prefer to have not ever found out how that happened. I think that's best left to the imagination, personally.
Yeah. My biggest problem with the scene is that it's a little cartoony, which is fine, I guess. But the bigger problem for me is that when you see Gandalf is capable of this, why is he not doing that in every other fight scene? Why is he not blasting orcs left and right? Why is he only swinging a sword around? And it's just because, like, for a minute, Peter Jackson was like, this would be really cool to do, and didn't think about the logic of the story, which normally he's pretty good at, I think. So it just, when I was younger, my objection was, that's not in the book. And then I grew out of that and realized there's actual reasons that it bothers me.
Yeah.
Because it's not in the book is not a entirely valid reason for hating something.
But it doesn't make this. It makes Gandalf's actions later in the movie not make as much sense. That's a valid complaint.
Yeah.
Like,
Also in that scene, Gandalf finding out about the Palantir. Or is it that? Yes, around that same scene. Yeah. He finds out about it, and then that means that later in Return of the King, when Pippin has the Palantir.
Yeah.
Like, Gandalf, in the book, Gandalf doesn't know that that's what it is. So he's less cautious about it than he would have been if he'd known. Whereas in the movie, he's like, oh, I can just hold this. It's fine. Yeah. Anybody can look at it. It's not a big deal. Which is, that's a Return of the King problem. We're not talking about the Return of the King.
We'll get there.
We'll get to that. So,
there's just a few moments like that where, especially, they all have to do with Saruman, I feel like, where the reality of the story breaks down because they wanted to do something cool.
Yeah. When, that's not the point of the wizards. They're not there to be cool. And I feel like
they're just giant dorks, and that's fine.
Yeah. They like reading and stuff.
They like reading, or like the scene, and this is on its own. This is so cool, and I love it. But like when Saruman is summoning the snowstorm to bury the adventuring party on Karadas, in the book, the mountain itself is just malicious.
Yeah.
I love that. That's fine. But if Saruman can do that, why is he not doing it for other things? Why is he only using this storm on it's just trying to do something cool, and it works for a minute, and then it ruins it, whatever comes. So it's anyway.
That's my like screenwriting rule is if you make a decision based on going, wouldn't it be cool if you don't do it? You're already leading yourself, and if you're in a writer's room, you're leading the writer's room astray. It is. It's just like
wide is the gate.
Yeah, like leave that to the director or something. Although I guess in this case that's no good
either. When you're the screenwriter, you can do what you want.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's always going to lead you astray.
But like at the same time, that shot zooming over Orthanc as Saruman is chanting in Quenya is pretty freaking cool.
I suppose.
So I mean, I don't like that overall, but
the visual pleasure, the language of film, it has a role.
Just the angles of the tower changing as it swoops past you. I love that kind of thing, visually. Logistically, not so much.
Yeah.
One can't have everything. The fact that the Saruman is essentially our true chief antagonist for the film, even though he's just, sending things out there, and we got good old Lurtz invented for the film, but actually works. It actually works.
Lurtz is great.
More about Lurtz in a bit, but having Saruman be the sort of like the prime motivator of all the bad things happening, it does skew the story somewhat. But at the same time, it's one of those things you're like, okay, I can sort of see that. But again, it's also this is something where the weird little hints that emerge throughout the book itself, where it's sort of like there are other forces out there and we don't know what they're doing, and all that, or we only see them sort of secondhand and we're not too sure, if they're evil or not, or they're actually concerned or not.
The paranoia in the book, especially like when you see a bird and you're like, is that a Saruman spy? I have no idea.
Right.
That's, the movie's doing something totally different, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it's a very different flavor.
It is going on there. A couple last acting things maybe to talk about, because we haven't talked about that. John Rhys Davies is Gimli, Orlando Bloom is Legolas. Our buddy team. How do we think about them, at least at this point of the story and this point of the films?
Jared has some thoughts about Legolas.
Well, Oriana, go ahead, because I've got some stuff.
I thought he was fine because I don't think that much of Legolas in the books. He's except when he is also being kind of bitchy.
He's like the guy in your D&D group who can't make it to every meeting, so he's got to be like, when he shows up, he does something really cool because he has to, but then the rest of the time he's just totally checked out. That's Legolas.
Yeah,
in the books,
making
the
comments about elves run on light feet while everyone's just stumbling through the snow.
I did shot like that of him, they kept it like they managed to get that where he's like walking over the snow and everybody else is wading through it. That's so great.
That was great. Orlando Bloom seems like a nice guy, I guess. Wait, unless he isn't actually a nice guy. I haven't really done much research on him lately.
I think I've heard he's nice.
Okay, good.
And by all accounts, he seems to be relatively level-headed. So
he drove Liv Tyler around Wellington or whatever.
That sounds
to help
nice.
her out. It was nice.
That's sweet.
Yeah, my issue with Legolas in the movies is that I don't think Orlando Bloom. He's either the wrong actor for the part, except facially, or he was given poor direction or something, because 90% of Legolas in the movie is just like staring at something.
Yep.
And like furrowing his brow very meaningfully, like, oh, is that a bird? And there's no thought, head empty.
Just vibes. Legolas. That's Legolas, though.
But
no thoughts, just vibes. I'm sorry. No, you're totally right.
The way that it comes, the way that it is
conveyed.
acted,
Yeah.
Like Chris Hemsworth is really good at being like a silly
just
himbo.
Vibes. Yeah.
Yeah. Orlando Bloom it looks like somebody just told him to look at something and be intense.
Someone unplugged him.
He's not creating a character. He's just making some faces. And he works visually. He's very decorative. That's all fine. But I don't think that he really works as Legolas.
Like a mink stole.
Yeah.
Wow. Versus being stoles.
I was just like, what kind of accessory?
We're just accessorizing Middle Earth.
What are good elves good for here?
I do have Gimli thoughts that I probably won't be brief, but whatever.
Yeah.
John Rhys Davies is great in the part. He's perfect as Gimli. But I think the writing lets Gimli down because he's so often treated as the buffoon and the comic relief, and he's not granted any dignity.
No, that was the whole point of Gimli in the first place. We did that whole episode about dwarves.
He's there to make the dwarves less of a stereotype. But he's not even like the bad dwarf stereotype. He's just a buffoon. He's just wandering around going like red meat off the bone, and that's okay.
Nobody tosses a dwarf. And it's
The movie overall has a dwarf problem, I think.
Yeah.
Like, Gimli isn't scripted all that great. John Rhys Davies tries, he can't overcome it, but also, like, Moria itself is supposed to be this vast, amazing city, and it's just, like, a mine.
Yeah, there's a big hallway.
Yeah, and, the script has Gimli going, they call it a mine, and it's really... But they're walking around these unfinished passages.
They're walking in, and their bones are crunching beneath their feet. It's very obvious immediately that it's not a mine, it's a tomb. That's one weird misstep, I will say.
And then when they get further into Moria, and they're wandering through these literal mines.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be this fallen civilization that was once great and very beautiful and powerful. And we get a little bit of that in the moment where Gandalf illuminates his staff and there's that hall full of pillars and the music swells, and I love that part. It's so good. But the rest of it is just like a dungeon.
Yeah, and
it's not great.
Even the Great Hall is still, it's so big and so empty. Like, the columns look cool, but show me something else in there other than the columns.
I love that emptiness, actually, because
I think because there was nothing else indicating, like you said, that it's this once great civilization that, like, I just need something else in there.
Yeah.
Like some form of something that gives me a hint as to who these people were.
Yeah. I mean, the book doesn't really get into that, but that's part. I mean, the book is able to
evoke. I feel
and you don't. The book is that sequence is dark.
Yeah.
There's no visual description because there's nothing to see, because there's just like Gandalf's little nightlight thing, and that's it. The movies, they have to be more explicit about what's around the group.
Yeah.
But why not make that visual different from what we got? Why is it a mine? And to finish the thought, I do love that emptiness because it does convey this idea that this place has been plundered. It is emptied, which is great. But why isn't the rest of it like that? If you have the opportunity, if you have the light, which we do, why is it not? Anyway, I'm done. I'm done talking about dwarves.
A sequence from that scene that I think everybody kind of remembers, you remember it easily, is the one part that is wholly invented, is not in the book at all, and that is, of course, jumping over the staircase and the attack and the whole thing, and getting the staircase to fall over so they can leap and continue on, and the music really hits then and all that. I would argue it's actually a great movie action sequence moment, but it's absolutely not the book. It's just anything but the book. And, again, it's the question of what do you do in an adaptation? If I were Christopher Tolkien, which I'm not, he would be like, okay, there's 5-10 minutes there you could spend on some of the deeper themes or doing different approaches. He wouldn't be wrong, but at the same time, this is what we got. So, and I think it works. I think it worked for audiences then, and I think it works for now. Moving one big point, and then I think we can get really into the key thing that I think we all agree on. But the first thing is the music, Peerless.
Oh man,
you can listen to the soundtrack straight up, the full soundtrack as released. It's out there. I have all the fancy editions, every last little bit of music. And it's just like, where you're at, you see it on your head, you let it flow, you're like, Shore did astounding work. Astounding.
Yes.
Not one foot put wrong. I can't think of any part of the music I would change.
No.
No.
It's all all good.
It's
all good.
striking use of guest vocalists as well.
Like Elizabeth Fraser. That's
Liz
such
Fraser,
a great
Cocteau Twins is Lothlorien. Perfect. And all that.
Yes.
Ironically, even though Enya, of course, has the lead theme at the end, which is perfectly fine, and of course she also has the song that's in Rivendell itself, where Aragorn and Arwen are meeting. The funny part is that I can say this, why I'm a fan, is that on her third album, Enya's third album, Shepherd Moons, she had a song called Lothlorien. It's sort of like, well, if you're going to call it, why don't you just have her, they had Liz Fraser instead. It's all good. but besides the just the deft use of vocalists, there's also, of course, the in the extended version, there's the vocals of the singing of the song of the Wandering Companies that with Frodo and Sam see. They don't interact with like in the book. You've got that sequence playing over. You've got the
before the soundtrack, the extended soundtrack came out, I used to put in the DVD. Fast forward to that part with the elves, crank the volume just to hear the elves sing, and then have to like mute it instantly because as soon as the hobbits start talking, it would hurt my ears because it was so loud. But yeah, that makes whatever else the extended edition does, that one song is so worth it.
And also the fact that some of the source music isn't sure. There is that team that did that music did the Flaming Red Hair, the sort of Hobbit dance sequence at the birthday party, which was very nicely done, and all that. But you have this nice little interweaving, and again, and Shore is the main body of things. Just every motif is astounding, immediately memorable. The variety in terms of what he does with the orchestrations, choice of instruments. It's sort of like, man, I already knew he was a really good composer for film. His Cronenberg work, he did the soundtrack to the absolutely wonderful Ed Wood, easily my favorite Tim Burton and for what it's worth Johnny Depp film of all time, and other examples besides. But just to see him just do this, it has the gift of being seeming effortless, even though it clearly was a lot of effort. But it's just astoundingly well done.
Grace.
So I just win all the awards, please. So one of these days I'll see him conduct that stuff live. Let's keep an eye on the time. The original versus episode was really, really long. Let's try and get focused here. Let's talk about
Too late.
Yeah, so many things to talk about, and we can all certainly leap back, and we'll also probably bring up points of comparison when we do the other films eventually. But the thing that really makes this film succeed, and that is just completely nails it, is the ending. It nails.
Yes.
It does the impossible.
Yes.
It takes something that's only the first part of a 3-part story, and it nails it as an ending that is satisfying and incredibly well done. That the entire last 20-25 minutes, as soon as they get to the point, as soon as they pull up on, not Sarngabir, this, past the Argonath,
Parthgullen.
Yeah, that spot. And, the Rarus Falls and all that. Everything, just about everything, I almost couldn't change a thing about that. That is so well done.
It's amazingly subtle, the build up to that moment. I mean, I didn't consciously pick up on it when I was younger, but the way like Frodo decides to leave the company, and in the book it works, it's fine, but the movies do a different sell it differently, where he's building up guilt throughout the runtime about these people are at risk because of me, I have to leave them, and so his decision to leave does feel like the natural ending of a character arc in a way that it isn't in the book, because he's got 2 more books to go. It doesn't have that burden of feeling like an ending, but the really subtle build to that decision is fabulous. It's not underlined, but it's there,
and he includes the fact that the team were able to include an actual twist from the book, something that's not in the book, but actually make it work in the film, is Aragorn's temptation scene. That's a scene that shouldn't have happened in many ways, and yet it did, and yet it works.
It really works.
Even something of the visual language, when he wraps up Frodo's hand to hold the ring, and it shows the ring of Barahir on his finger. It's almost get the sense of, I have my own allegiances, and I know what is the right thing to do here. Even though I'm actually totally fine with the fact that Aragorn is never quite so directly tempted. If anything, the temptation scene is the scene back where he is meeting with them in the side parlor in the Prancing Pony, where he tells Sam, it's like, I could take the ring now, but I'm not going to, and all that. This, the stakes are higher. This thing is happening, and it's sort of like this nice little quiet, sort of serene moment before everything goes to hell, because here the Iroquois are about to come over, swarming over the hillside, and then just how everything is set up. The you can't call it the death of Boromir. It's the execution of Boromir. That is a grimly beautiful sequence. So
just really brief on Aragorn's temptation scene, that one shot where he like closes, his hand around Frodo to hide the ring and then takes his hands away. I love the thing Viggo Mortensen does where when he lets go of Frodo's hand, he doesn't just let go, he like flattens his fingers out, almost like really rejecting it, but almost in a weird, silly sort of way, like when you feed a horse, you got to keep your hands flat because they'll get bitten off. He's backing away noticeably without actually moving his body, and it's such a neat little acting touch. Anyway, Uruk-hai, we didn't really talk about Lurtz, except to say he was a good choice. Let's talk about Lurtz for a second.
It's nice that they created a character to sort of focus our enmity on. I think that's great. We do have to, and I know we talked a little bit about this in the orc episode about
There's some stuff to reckon with.
Much it's not good that the Uruk-hai look the way they do, because the goblins, the other orcs, the mountain orcs in particular, look great. There's nothing, no weird
pale,
race thing there.
Weirdos.
Love it. Great. Having the Uruk-hai have black skin and like dreadlocks.
And they're almost all played by, I think, native Maori.
A number of them are.
For God's sake. I mean, like, look, I'm happy they
if that's the
work,
stuntman you can get, okay, but...
But can we simply not do that? But the prosthetics and stuff are terrifying. Cool.
And Lurtz's, it's not a very subtle performance, but
it doesn't need to be.
He doesn't need to be. Where, like the weird little things he does, where he like pulls out that knife and licks it for no real reason, except to intimidate Aragorn, and it's so disgusting.
And pulling the sword into himself.
Yeah, so that he can get closer to Aragorn to kill him, even when it's so gross, but it's so
tells you everything you need to know about this type of orc, without actually having to spell it out.
At one point there's that cut close up to Aragorn on the ground, bloodied, looking up. He's sort of like, "What is this guy?" This of like, what am I? I have never dealt with anything like this before. The
moment that every time I see it makes me just clutch my neck is when the shield fly.
Oh God!
How did that? Every single time I'm like, how is he not decapitated?
It's just got that handy little divot, and
it's got that handy little divot. But and when he's struggling to get out, it is the most tense I am in the entire movie. Even though I have seen it, I don't even know how many dozens of times at this point. But every time it gets me. I'm like, oh God, he's not going to get out in time.
He's trapped. Yeah, I mean, you've read the books, Aragorn's going to last for at least 2 more movies, but.
And yet.
And then it builds up, and of course, that speaking of decapitation, Lurtz gets his. Always a huge round of applause whenever I saw that in the theaters. That was quite something.
Fun.
And then it's this very careful, just right enough bit of ease down. We have Sean Bean meets his end. Very, very lovely and well done scene. Not quite the book, but works very much
better,
in its own right.
I think, honestly.
And just the little the way everything sort of eases down there, and then that just pure moment where we cut and it's Frodo standing on the shore. He runs back again. That key thing from from the discussion he had with Gandalf, and that's a case where I think everything. The way Elijah Wood looks, the way the music, when the music comes back in, the camera angles, the fade in with Gandalf, then fade back to Frodo. It's just one of those things sort of like, wow, you nailed it. What a way to make a lovely moment. And then it keeps going with the brilliant moment with Sam coming in almost drowning, being rescued, and then just it's sort of like, wow, hit the emotion hard. Well done. And it's astoundingly well done.
My only quibble with the ending is the "let's hunt some orc."
Oh, yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
Don't love that. It does feel like you guys they were selling past the close.
Yeah.
They needed
it's a little meats back on the menu, boys.
Yeah,
in terms
We'll
of,
get to that one.
They clearly needed a way to set up like these guys are not disappearing. We will be following them in the next one. Don't you
the
worry.
continuing adventure.
Right.
Exactly,
Yeah.
but it just feels a little tacked on.
It's a little, yeah.
It's like, was this an on-set rewrite? Like, let's hunt some orc. Oh no.
It may be a little much, but I think the idea of just sort of like, just Aragorn saying, Frodo's fate no longer in our hands, and just the wordless shot of him putting on Boromir's what they called van braces, the things covering his wrists there, just the burrows and that lovely touch.
Bracers.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, but I also like, despite the line, we see them run off, and then the music hits this nice swell, the swooping fusion of Frodo and Sam coming up. Mordor, there it is.
There it is.
But they're
Yeah.
and again, and throughout the film, Jackson's very good at this. Lots of good close-ups, there may be all sorts of spectacular vistas or unusual things around it, but let's concentrate on the actors and give them a moment.
Face.
And
Let them give us face.
Yep, and just sort of like they have that moment, they walk away, and everything just fades to black. Amazing. They just nailed it. That is the most successful individual film of all of them.
Yes.
Unquestionably.
No argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did exactly what it had to do. It was sort of like, here is this world, it has to work. And I think, arguably, again, we sort of keep mentioning offhand, a good modern example of this is something like the Dune movie that came out. It's not the end of the story, but it ends just right in a certain sort. It ends with a line that's sort of like setting it up, just the beginning. But the point is, it's sort of like it finds a spot and sort of like, okay, and I do want to see more. That's the thing about it. This one's sort of like, wow, we've been on a ride and there's more to go, and we do want to see more. And the story I'll always tell is that it was my fourth or fifth time watching it at that point, but for a Christmas Day back in 2001, my parents and my sis and I all watch it. My mom's sitting next to me, that sort of face black. She's like, what happens? What's the story? I really want to know. And I'm like, yeah, they got to wait for the films. You got to read the book, Mom. To her credit, she read the book. But just, yeah, it's truly something. Wow, 20 years, but it's good to think about that sort of Reacher time. Of course, now we have 20 years. We have that new Matrix movie coming out, so maybe everything is coming back around again. Who knows?
Yeah, not to plug another podcast, but my husband and I do one about 90s action movies, and we talked about the Matrix for an episode coming out in a couple weeks. So.
And where can they find this other podcast of
it's
yours,
called
Oriana?
Mission Recall, and it's available on, I don't know, whatever podcast, whatever you use to listen to
fine
podcasts.
podcasts are sold.
Yeah.
All right, the choice of topic has come back around to me, and that means for our January episode, we'll be doing what we've been doing for the past 2 Januaries, which is looking at non-Middle-earth work of Tolkien, and in this case, we'll be looking at 2 in 1 volume. We will be looking at Tree and Leaf. This is the combination of Tolkien's nonfiction essay on fairy stories, which is essentially as close to his statement of aesthetic, one can say, in terms of what he enjoyed and also what he wrote about, as well as his explicitly Catholic parable, Leaf by Niggle. And so the fact that the 2 were combined this way, even though they were published completely and prepared completely independently, is of interest in its own right. Basically, not to say how one influences the other, but just a way to consider the whole. And the fact that if we did only one or the other, it would be a very short episode. This will make it a little bit thing. They're both very short pieces, but they're just good reflections to talk about and think about in terms of his creative life on various levels. So maybe a bit heady, not quite as much adventure-y stuff in this one, but we will do that next time. So hooray for that. Wow, we made it through. We did our version 2.0 of the episode here. We would especially like to thank our fellow podcaster on the Megaphone Network, Mikey Collins. Thank you, Mikey. He is editing this episode. He's been patiently
Mikey.
waiting for us to get this done with him. The reason why he's doing it this time is that I would normally do it, but when your arm's in a sling, as it's been for the past 4 weeks now, thanks to a small fracture I got, editing is not so easy. So I'm healing, and I will hopefully be back to be able to do editing next time. So and all that. But I'm not dying by inches, I hope. So there, one can hope. Let's see. So there it is with that. Okay, well, we're tired. We've recorded this at an unusual time for us. It's not too late in the evening, but I think some of us are all like, at this point. So we will now wish you all a very Merry Christmas or holidays or whatever it is you've been doing, or even nothing at all. We totally appreciate it because it's been a long 2 years of us having to deal with things.
Oh my God.
Oh, yes.
Cross fingers for the next one. Stay safe, stay vaccinated, get your boosters. It's
Yeah.
all the stuff we could say.
Boost up, babies.
We will say that. Oh my goodness. We will see what the new year brings us. We will look forward to talking to you then. We'll be hopefully a little less tired this time, and we will be more honestly surprised and enthused about things that we hadn't talked over twice. So this time around. But we did a good job. We got ourselves through it. That was the key thing. So thank you very much for listening as always. Until then, we'll see you next time. Thanks again for listening to this episode of By the Bywater. Please subscribe and rate us via your favorite podcast listening options.
Episodes and show notes are at megaphonic.fm/bythebywater, all one word. You can also message us through here. Email us at bythebywater@megaphonic.fm or follow us on Twitter at By-The-Bywater.
You can also follow us individually on Twitter and ask questions there. I'm at Vandroid Helsing.
I'm at Schwinter, SCHWINDTER.
And I'm Ned Raggett, 2 G's, 2 T's. By the Bywater is a proud member of Megaphonic Podcast Network. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. We hope you join us again next time. Until then, Namarie.